Shaheen.
Thank you. Dr. Cha, you mentioned, and I think the other two panelists also suggested this, that the new cooperation between Russia and China and North Korea on the war in Ukraine is having an impact. Can you talk about the impact that that's having to our throughout the Indo-Pacific and the concerns that that raises with our other allies in the region?
I'm happy to, Senator. So I think it has had sort of three effects. The first is it has clearly had an effect on the battlefield in the sense that 12,000 North Korean troops in Kursk to try to regain some territory before peace negotiations start. Again, 50% of Russian munitions today reportedly is sourced from North Korea. These are having real impacts on the battlefield. That's the first point. The second is that it has really created a lot of concern among Indo-Pacific partners that anything is possible in Asia now. War in the middle of Europe that looks like a war from days past caused them to think not only is war in the Taiwan Straits possible, not only is war in the Korean Peninsula possible, but these things could happen at the same time through opportunistic aggression. For the first time, we've started getting inquiries from both South Korean and Taiwan friends to think more trilaterally about those sorts of dual contingency scenarios. And then the third effect, I think, is it has really closed the gap between the way our European friends, our Indo-Pacific friends think about security. There's no longer two theaters. It really is one theater. I've I think in the past year made more trips to Brussels than I have to the Indo-Pacific region because of all the interest in Asia. And the level of conversation, I think my colleagues would agree, in Europe on Indo-Pacific security now is at a much, much higher level than it was even a year ago. So those would be the three things I would say.
Thank you. Do either of you want to add to that? Yes, Dr. Mastro.
Thank you, ma'am. I would add, for the China-Russia relationship in particular, there are four main things that they are complicating for the United States. But first and foremost, their relationship is making it harder for the United States to deter the two countries independently. And then I think we can see with Ukraine, and I would predict it would be the same thing in the Indo-Pacific, it makes it harder for us to compel them to stop fighting. And the reasons for that is, first, these two countries, while they might not fight together in the sort of interoperable alliance framework, they are serving and building the ability to serve as a strategic rear to one another.
So let me interrupt for a minute, because in some quarters there's a suggestion that we can actually pull Russia away from China and separate the two of them. Can you speak to that? And Dr. Cha, you may want to speak to that as well as Mr. Shriver.
I would say, generally speaking, I've done a historical review of the relationship since 1949, and the idea that you could present positive inducements or try to convince Russia, for example, that China is a greater threat than the United States or vice versa is not going to work. The best strategy, if we had any hope of pulling them apart, is that for now, while European countries are more concerned about the Indo-Pacific, it is not the case that they're reacting to China as if China is such a strong partner to Russia. They still have very strong economic relations with China, and they're reluctant to punish China for that relationship. If the Chinese thought it would come at an economic cost, their relationship with Russia, I think they would be much better geared to pull apart. So NATO could play a greater role in that that economic relationship with China to show them that they can't just get all the military benefits from Russia without some diplomatic and economic costs.
Mr. Shriver, do you have any?
I'd be highly suspicious of that endeavor, I think, particularly with Mr. Putin and Xi Jinping and the relationship that they've developed and the mutual reinforcing activities that have made them, alliance-like. I'd also point out, some people refer to this as the reverse Kissinger. Of course, when Kissinger courted China, China and Russia had already, then the Soviet Union, had already had a very significant falling out. So it wasn't creating a fissure, it was taking advantage of a fissure.
Thank you. Dr. Cha, anything to add?
I was actually going to make a similar point as Randy's. I mean, I think in international relations, that sort of diplomacy only works if you occupy the pivot position where the other two sides are coming to you. That's what was happening with Kissingerian diplomacy between the Soviet Union and China. In this case, if we were to try a reverse Kissinger, it would be Russia that occupies the pivot position. And so for that reason, I think it would be suspect. Yeah.
Thank you.
Senator Ricketts.